that Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa has resigned following weeks of anti-government protests. The senior Rajapaksa had initially resisted calls from the opposition to step down, but now it seems the public pressure has forced him to throw in his towel. Reports say President Gotabaya Rajapaksa asked the Prime Minister to resign at a special cabinet meeting. Remember, Mahinda is the eldest brother to President Gotabaya. Mahinda himself served as the President of Sri Lanka from the year 2005 to 2015, almost a decade. Together, the Rajapaksa clan has been accused of creating the economic crisis in Sri Lanka. The country's foreign reserves are down below $50 million US, and the country has been asking the IMF and also other countries to assist them come out of this crisis, and this has triggered massive anti-government protests across the island. Just last week, the opposition filed 2 no-confidence motions in Parliament. One was against the President, the other was against the Prime Minister. It seems that Mahinda had no intention of facing this no-trust confidence motion. His resignation follows a similar move by the Parliament's Deputy Speaker last week. Sri Lanka's Health Minister too has resigned. If you're just joining us, this is some breaking news from Sri Lanka. It's actually a developing story from Sri Lanka. We are receiving reports that the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka, Mahinda Rajapaksa, has tendered his resignation following weeks of anti-government protests. The senior Rajapaksa had initially resisted calls from the opposition to step down, but now it seems the public pressure has forced his hand. And now reports say President Gotabaya asked the Prime Minister to resign at a special cabinet meeting. Let's talk more about this. Our correspondent is joining us on the line from Colombo. Dasunia Tauda, if you can hear me, probably you can give us more details about this latest development.
Yes, Eric, I hope you can hear me too. We seem to be having minor technical issues on our end. Nevertheless, yes, we are looking at a breaking news story here in Sri Lanka where it is now confirmed that Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa has in fact handed in his letter of resignation. Now, whether this has been accepted or whether this will be taken forward is yet to be known, but we know so far for sure that a letter of resignation by Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa has now been sent to President Gotabaya Rajapaksa. Now, this is extremely big news, provided that we all know for the past few weeks the Premier has remained on his stance that he will not be resigning and that he has no intention to resign. And this is a complete 180, given that today he has now, in writing, informed of his intention to resign.
What does this say about the protests? Because earlier today we had people who were supporting the Prime Minister and others were not supporting the Prime Minister or the government. So what does it say about the protests going forward?
Well, yes, the protests took quite a violent turn this afternoon, as you would have seen, Eric, because when we had anti-government protesters along with pro-government protesters who met at these protest sites that have been there for weeks now, things got really violent, where tear gas, water cannons and all other methods were used by security forces to disperse these crowds. And from what we know so far, 78 of them have been injured and have been admitted to the National Hospital here in Colombo. Now, this is obviously a clash between two parties. One was pro-government and the other was anti-government. I think it was mainly this protest that took place this afternoon that would have pushed for this decision to come forward. We have to also keep in mind it was at this specific afternoon itself that Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa made a statement to his supporters that he is ready to make a decision for the sake of the hopes and aspirations of the country and its people. So this might be the decision that he was looking at, and that would have been sort of a signal for us to understand that this is what we are to expect. But so far, what we know is that the protests are still continuing, and we can only wait and see whether this decision will finally pacify the frustration and the anger of the people.
We also hear reports that Sri Lanka's health minister has resigned. Do we have more information about that, Dasuni?
Well, Eric, naturally, when the Prime Minister steps down from his post, the cabinet that he himself appointed also ceases to function. So regardless of whether this resignation is sent forward, if the President steps down, then automatically the entire cabinet ceases to be in effect as well. But yes, it is also confirmed that the Health Minister has sent in his letter of resignation, along with another minister as well.
Dasuni, you have been reporting about this situation for weeks now. Do you see this as a welcome relief for Sri Lanka?
It's a little too soon to say, Eric, given that the protests took a completely a pivotal shift today in sort of understanding the mood and the pulse of the people. For weeks on end, the people have been voicing their frustration in a more calm and collected manner. But today's clashes really brought about the anger and the frustration that the people had towards this government. And this is a story, this is just mere minutes from understanding this story. So we can only wait for the next couple of hours to really understand the pulse and the mood of the people following this decision.
There are some who will ask, was Mahinda Rajapaksa's position untenable because the president Gotabaya, in a special cabinet meeting, also reportedly asked for his resignation?
Yes, Eric, this is all stories that we have been reporting, and this specific story, whether the Prime Minister will resign or not, has been making headlines, like I've rightfully said, for weeks on end. So whether this is the solution that the people have been looking for, or whether this is enough to pacify the anger of the people, or whether this will basically quell the protests right now, remains to be seen. And yes, questions do arise as to who will take on the mantle now, provided that the Prime Minister steps down, and who will be the new Prime Minister, whether it will be a candidate again from the government or somebody from the opposition, will be interesting to see, Eric.
Besides the protest, how is the situation in Sri Lanka?
Well, right now, a severe traffic congestion has been reported across all main roads in Colombo. Office staff have come onto the streets in protest. Clashes are breaking out almost at every corner of the road. The people are really showing out their anger and getting a little violent, to say the least. Buses have been trashed. The fuel tanks of all these buses are leaking with fuel. So there is a possibility these vehicles can be set alight if things get more tense. The police is also outnumbered, provided that the citizens are now really agitated, Eric.
You know, some people will ask or will want to know, so what happens next now that the resignation will be confirmed?
Yes, now that we know that a letter of resignation has in fact been sent, it is up to the president to accept that. And that will, the president's decision whether or not to accept this will really set the course of the political shift here in Sri Lanka. But as of right now, it's a lot of people panicking because island-wide curfew has been imposed, but the protesters are merely not listening to these curfew orders. They are defying it. Office staff are now trying to walk towards the Gota Gogama, one of the main protest sites, to protest. Truly unprecedented times right now, Eric.
What's the process of choosing a new Prime Minister in Sri Lanka?
Well, I think a Prime Minister has to have the confidence of the House, is my understanding. And I think all of that is things that need to be looked at following the decision of the President. It is important to know what the President has to do regarding this situation. And we are also of the understanding that the opposition is not willing to work with this government. So if there is a possibility for the opposition to take on the role of a Prime Minister, is the opposition really ready to work with the president is also a question that remains to be seen, and whether just the Prime Minister resigning right now, whether that is sufficient for as a solution for this crisis also remains to be seen, Eric. Like I said, this is a very new story. It is pretty developing, and obviously we will have all these answers in the coming hours.
Dasuni, stay with me because I have to update our viewers on what is currently happening. If you're just joining us, this is breaking news coming in from Sri Lanka, and reports suggest that Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa has resigned following weeks of anti-government protests. The senior Rajapaksa had initially resisted calls from the opposition to step down, but now it seems the public pressure has forced him to throw in his towel. Reports say President Gotabaya asked the Prime Minister to resign at a special cabinet meeting. Remember, Mahinda is the eldest brother to President Gotabaya. Mahinda himself served as the President of Sri Lanka from 2005 to 2015. Together, the Rajapaksa clan has been accused of creating the economic crisis in Sri Lanka. The country's foreign reserves are down below $50 million, and this has triggered massive anti-government protests across the island. Just last week, the opposition filed 2 no-confidence motions in Parliament, one against the President, the other against the Prime Minister. Dasuni, coming back to you, and let's talk about the last point that I made. The opposition filing 2 no-confidence motions in Parliament. How is that going?
Well, Eric, one of the no-confidence motions were against the government and the other was against the president. So it remains to be seen, provided that today's development, the development that we received mere moments ago, whether this might sort of impact the opposition and their stance on pushing forward for this. Also keep in mind, for a no-confidence motion to be pushed through in Parliament, it first needs to be tabled, following that a debate needs to be held, and after that only voting takes place. So this in itself also is going to take quite some time, a few weeks at most. And for that too, for the vote to come through, you need at least 113 votes, for which the opposition so far, by the looks of it, has not garnered that number of votes. So the development that we are just receiving right now regarding the resignation of Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa, or rather his intention to resign and sending in his letter of resignation to the President, is key right now, and everything will depend on the decision that the President expects to take.
Critics have argued that the government seems helpless to save Sri Lanka at this moment. And the question is, who or what can save Sri Lanka?
That is a very interesting question, Eric, given the fact that everyone is of the view that whatever that's happening in Sri Lanka right now has been because of the mismanagement over the past nearly 2 years of this government and the decisions and the policies that they have been taken. And many of them are of the view that it's a little too late to sort of come out of this. Nevertheless, it isn't impossible, I would feel, but at the same time, like I said, my view is also pretty much similar to many of the citizens of this country who feel that, you know, enough is enough and that a lot has been done so far, and only proper political reform will make way for absolute change right now.
Well, Dasuni, we also understand that corruption is rife in Sri Lanka. There are some who claim that the assistance or the help that was brought into the country from India and other countries has been misused. Is it so?
Well, we have received reports in certain instances noting that the credit lines that were extended have been misused for other purposes. Nevertheless, the Indian High Commission in particular have been quite vocal and have issued many clarifications regarding these statements and have voiced out their objection and have called out these false reports on multiple occasions. So, according to the Indian High Commission, they actually did even put out a press release describing how these credit lines were being used. So going by those means, it appears that things are looking okay for now. But once again, we can only wait and see to see whether these funds were actually materialized in the ways that it was meant to be.
So probably you can tell us what we should expect going forward after this resignation.
Well, Eric, now that the letter has officially been sent, it is up to the president to accept it. So once the president accepts this letter of resignation, we are to see what happens to the cabinet. Automatically, this cabinet will dissolve, which means that a new cabinet can now step in, or there is also a possibility of an election, if I'm not mistaken. But this is somewhat of an extreme scenario, given that the country's financial crisis will not allow for an election to take place in the given scenario. Nevertheless, I think a lot depends right now on whether the president will accept this letter of resignation or not. So that is what everyone is waiting to see right now, because now we know for sure that the letter of resignation has been sent from the premier's end to the president, and it is up to the president to accept it. And we must also not forget the president and the prime minister are also brothers.
Well, besides these protests across the country, many were asking, where are the civil society groups? Were they even participating in some of these protests? And what are some of their demands, so to speak?
Well, yes, there has been massive civil society participation for protests, especially in those involving in Colombo and the suburbs. And all these civil societies and the citizens in general over the past few weeks, Eric, have been asking is for the president to step down and the president-led government to step down. They've asked for accountability. They've asked for a stop for corruption and these kind of things. These are their main concerns. And when we look at the proposals that have been put forward by many of these civil societies, including that of the Bar Association of Sri Lanka, which is a prominent professional body for legal experts here in Sri Lanka. One of their key proposals have been for the abolishing of the executive presidency. So if you look at all of these demands that the people have been asking for the past 3 weeks, it's most certainly the abolishing of the executive presidency that a lot of them have been asking for. So it will be interesting to see whether President Gotabaya Rajapaksa will first accept this resignation of Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa and then move on and to look at these proposals, more specifically the one put forward by the Bar Association of Sri Lanka.
Well, this will be an overreach for me, but I have to ask it. Now that the Prime Minister has resigned, is there any likelihood that the President will follow suit?
Well, Eric, yes, that is certainly an overreach, given that that is very much up in the air as well. Like, that is not something I can confirm from my end right now.
All right, so if you're just joining us, let me just give you an update on what is happening. This is in Sri Lanka, and we are receiving reports that and actually those reports have been confirmed that the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka, Mahinda Rajapaksa, has resigned from his position as the Premier of the country, and the senior Rajapaksa had initially resisted calls from the opposition to step down, but now it seems the public pressure has forced him to hand over his towel. Reports say President Gotabaya asked the Prime Minister to resign at a special cabinet meeting. Remember, Mahinda is the eldest brother to the President Gotabaya. Mahinda himself served as the President of Sri Lanka from the year 2005 to 2015, almost a decade. Together, the Rajapaksa clan has been accused of creating the economic crisis in Sri Lanka. The country's foreign reserves are down below $50 million, and this has triggered massive anti-government protests across the island. Just last week, the opposition filed 2 no-confidence motions in Parliament. One was against the President, the other was against the Prime Minister. Now it seems Mahinda had no intention of facing the no-trust vote. His resignation follows a similar move by the Parliament's Deputy Speaker last week. And we are also receiving reports that Sri Lanka's Health Minister has also resigned. Dasunia Tauda is our correspondent. She's on the line from Colombo. Probably you can give us more updates if you have any new updates from this development.
Well, Eric, so far that has been the main development for the past few minutes as well. We now know for sure that Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa has sent in his letter of resignation, and there is a letter from the Prime Minister's office as well confirming this. So everything pretty much now centers upon what decision the President will take regarding the Prime Minister's intention to resign. And from the protest front, things did get pretty violent. Also, island-wide curfew has now been imposed, but I think no one is really listening to these curfew orders as well, because protesters continue to march in their hundreds towards the main protest sites, that is Maina Gogama, which is opposite the temple trees, and then Gota Gogama, which is one of the central sites that have now been protesting for more than a month, which is opposite the presidential secretariat. We've also seen in the past few hours a massive show of support from those who are currently in the office premises around these two protest sites, also leaving their jobs to sort of show their support to these protests. And yes, situation is a little tense as well in other areas. We've seen some ugly clashes between pro-government and anti-government protesters. Damage to public property, especially vehicles which transported pro-government protesters, were seen, where buses have been trashed and fuel engines have been severely damaged with leaking fuel tanks. So the situation is very tense. There is traffic in and around Colombo as well, Eric.
Dasunia Thauda is our correspondent from Colombo. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.